I'll be your host for the rest of the afternoon, but my real excitement at this moment is to be able to introduce to you Eric Dresselhaus, who is the CEO of Smart Energy Water. He's coming off of a very successful run as being the CEO of Silver Spring Networks, which was acquired by Itron. And here's a person who could do anything in the world, but he's chosen to do Smart Energy Water. So with that introduction, let's bring him to the stage and learn more.
Thank you, HG.
Yeah.
And thanks all for not bailing out after lunch. We really appreciate it. It's great to be back here at ETS for me. I was here at the very first one, and I've been to many, but as HG said, I've been here in an infrastructure role historically, and I'm here today talking about customers. And I think I'm on the customer topic honestly, in the sense that back in the early days of things like smart meters and smart grids, there was a lot of customer pushback. As the then president of PG&E noted, we thought we were doing an infrastructure project, and it turns out we were doing a customer project. So I had a great time with my good friend Helen Burt, who's here in the audience, who Helen and I got to go around and do town hall meetings and explain to everybody that we weren't spying on them, nor were we trying to melt their brains. I do think it's important to note that when we talk about customers, I think we've made a lot of progress over the last 10 years or so. I don't hear utility executives referring to their customers as ratepayers, or worse yet, load on the system, which was a pretty common way to think about customers a decade ago. But I will argue today that I think we're on the doorstep of kind of a phase 2 or a next generation of customer engagement. So if we take a quick step back and think about what's happening in the world, the buzzwords run rampant. It's a big data, cloud-based, AI, social media-driven world, all happening on mobile, all in real time. Customers expect 24/7, 365 access. And as a result, their thoughts or their expectations of how they interact with service providers across a number of industries are changing quite a bit. We've thought in the past about customer segmentation in the industry as industrial, commercial, and residential. But the modern customer thinks about an ultimately customized, personalized relationship. If you have 1 million customers, you can expect 1 million customer service segmentations. And where do they get that from? Well, sorry folks, they're not getting it from utilities. They're getting it from all of the technology and all of the service providers around them. And so this is what's driving the expectation of the customer as you're interfacing with them on issues around energy. We want the omnipresence of Google, and we want the user experience of Amazon. I want to push a button and have it show up. The immediacy of Twitter, the simplicity of Apple. More importantly, if you dive into what customers are looking for, they're looking for a self-service, self-driven experience. They don't want to hear from you in the old way of getting a phone call. They want to interact with you whenever it's convenient for them, in whatever means they want to. And that makes it a lot harder. As we think about all of the topics that have come up yesterday afternoon and this morning, EVs and distributed generation and microgrids and smart homes and battery packs, all of that complexity is making the customer engagement harder and harder for the utility to know how the customer wants to be engaged. So it would be understandable if you were a utility person and you look up at the sky and it looks like vultures circling overhead. People coming in wanting to take the tasty bits of the business, the exciting stuff, the innovative stuff, leaving you with the burden of keeping the grid operating. And there's real challenges, many of which have been referred to in the earlier sessions, on how we're going to manage this increased customer expectation in a world with flat to perhaps declining revenues. Still, while the utility, whether it's a traditional integrated utility or an unbundled utility, has the responsibility for providing reliable, safe connectivity for everybody. All at a time when Tesla wants the batteries and VW wants the EV charging, and all of the other players are coming in to take a bit of your business. There's an interesting study that Bain put out recently that said that utilities have to reduce their OpEx by $15 billion, that's about 20% in the US, just to maintain the earnings per share expectations that investor-owned utilities have already set with their customers. So that's really the crux of the issue. We can see the right things to do, and we're maybe even excited to do them, but how do we pay for them? How do we create a customer-centric experience in a world where there's so much pressure on budgets and IT capacity? I would argue that there's quite a bit at stake here. And as came up on a few of the earlier panels, there's both risks and opportunities. The risks, if we get this wrong, is to have an ever-increasing OpEx as we lose customer satisfaction and our staffs become overburdened. And ultimately what will happen is we won't keep up with the customer, and that relationship will become disintermediated by these third parties. The opportunities, of course, are for faster innovation, more engaged employees, a better customer experience, and a lowering cost structure. And I'll argue that the way to become on the winner side of this column is to create the utility as the platform for customer information. So all of these topics we've talked about over the last day so far, energy efficiency, renewables, home area networks, see your power. My argument here today is that the utility should drive to become the hub of that information activity. Now, as was pointed out on the panel right before lunch, if you were here, that doesn't necessarily mean that the utility has to own all of these assets. In fact, it may not even be desirable to have the utility be the asset owner. But I want to drive the customer to think first about coming to the utility, engaging with the utility. So if I want to see my energy usage, of course I go to the utility. If I want to configure my Nest thermostat, I'm going to do it on the utility app because that's where all of my other devices are. That's where my battery is configured, and that's where I trade energy in the future when we're allowed to trade energy. And I think this is important, not just because it will maximize the customer benefit, but it will maximize the overall system and societal benefits as well. If we don't do this, if these things happen blindly to the utility, then ultimately the utility will be stuck holding the bag of ensuring reliability without having any of the insight or the knowledge as to what's happening on the system. Now, lest you think this is going to be a tough sale for your customers, I will argue that all of the evidence says they're already far ahead of you. And this is really us getting caught up. I give a shout out to the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative, Patty Durant's here. If you don't know her, you should know her, who just published a great study that investigates this idea of the utility as a platform. And the evidence supported by all of the evidence we see from other studies that have been done and the retail experiences of technology users everywhere else are pretty clear. Customers want this kind of behavior. They expect this kind of behavior, and they can't believe that they can't go to an app on their phone in real time and order services or change their pricing program or reconfigure their service anytime they want. I would call out this last bullet point in the corner. This is directly from the SECC's study, that 64% of customers surveyed would buy more products and services from a utility platform if it was easy to use and to understand. So the proposition we're putting forth here is, as they say, tastes like chocolate but has no calories, right? That we can digitize the customer experience and do that while simultaneously lowering the cost structure and addressing this budget pressure that we're under. The McKinsey report kind of drilling in, again, publicly available information is pretty interesting. The single largest component of EBIT improvement for utilities was in the digital customer experience. More than generation, more than distribution, 8.5 EBIT points. Talk to your CFO if you're not the CFO, that's real money. And so how is that possible? How can we do more and spend less? Sounds too good to be true. Ultimately, the part of this second wave of technology that's rolling out is giving us the ability to leverage those tools and those assets, those customer experiences, that mobile phone that somebody else did all the hard work to create. And you as the utility can ride that wave. So tools are available now that don't require you build this all from scratch. You can have constant, real-time communications back and forth with your customer on the terms that they expect. I use the analogy all the time of UPS at our house. Thanks to Amazon, the UPS driver and my wife are on a first-name basis. We get a notification every time there's a package coming, whether we knew it was coming or not, and we get confirmation that it arrived. If they tweak it along the way, maybe it got misrouted or the time got delayed, we get a real-time update from UPS. And if you haven't seen it now, UPS is even experimenting, and I believe FedEx is as well, taking a picture of your package on your doorstep to confirm that it was delivered. Now, they're also covering their butts because so many packages get stolen these days. But that's the expectation that your customer has for interfacing with the customer. We never talk to anybody at UPS along the way. So just to close and hopefully invigorate some conversation for this afternoon, the question you might be asking is, where do we go from here? And there's a lot to do. I certainly appreciate that there are a lot of competing priorities within the utility. But if I could leave you with one thought, it would be to focus on the customer experience. Walking around Distributech this year with a longtime participant in the industry, we were commenting about all of the software that was on display. And the gentleman looked at me and said, this is software designed by engineers, for engineers, to do engineering. And to transform your customer relationship, you're going to have to change the mindset from the way your silos are organized within your organizations or the way you've always done it, to really start first with what's the customer experience? How does the customer think about their engagement? When I see my bill, is that the time that I'm most open to buying something that may save me energy or reduce my bill? Or am I going to come back a week later and weave through a website to have to dig that out on my own? I would argue that if you follow the customer's expectations of how customers think things will work, it will lead you technologically to the right answer. And with that, thank you. I look forward to a great afternoon. And they said if there were any questions, I don't know if there'll be any questions, if they any tweaked in, otherwise we'll.
We've got 2 minutes, let's use it, right? Any questions that you want to ask quickly there? Looking out, going once.
We do have a question that came in.
Okay.
Some utilities have tried to move in the direction of operating online marketplaces. What is your take on how these efforts are going?
I think they're getting traction. I think the most utilities that I talk to that have run marketplaces, whether they've built their own or tapped into a marketplace that exists, are finding that they get good response. Now, that's a marketing effort, and it pushes the utility to not just hang a marketplace up and then hope that people come rushing to it. But you have to market it just like any other marketer of a marketplace would have to push out to the customers. In my old life, where we did a lot of networking, we talked about the signal-to-noise ratio. And if the noise floor is really high, you have to have more signal to rise above the noise. And I think that's part of what we see in marketplaces is how can we engage customers? As the SECC study showed, 64% of people at least claim that they want to do it. I don't think we've seen anybody really break the formula where they're getting those kinds of results yet. All right, thank you.
Thank you.